Namaste. Welcome to Chitti Media. This is our current affairs program. Today, we're going to be talking about the BBC and their anti-India slash anti-Hindu bias. To have this conversation with me today, I am joined by Adit Kothari. Namaste, Adit ji. Welcome to the show.
Namaste, Abhishek ji. Thank you so much for having me. It's a great opportunity uh, to sort of get our voice across to the rest of the community through Chitti Media and let them know exactly how BBC has been causing us, the entire Hindu and the Indian diaspora, so much of grief. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us as well. We appreciate having you here. Now, the main reason for this interview is that you're conducting a protest tomorrow, I believe. Would you like to tell us a little bit more about that protest and why you're doing it now?
Certainly. I mean, the anti-India reporting or the anti-Hindu bias from a prism of reporting standards that the BBC have essentially followed is not something new. I mean, it's been happening for a very long time. In 1965, during the war, the BBC was essentially halted from reporting in India primarily because of their pro-Pakistani reporting standards. The same happened in 1971, and it continued right into the 80s, and sorry, the late 80s when decorated journalists like Mark Tully refused to buy in that there was essentially Pakistani involvement in the terrorism that was essentially being spread um, in Kashmir, and he refused to buy in the argument that Pakistan was all behind it. Obviously, that was proved much later. So it's not something new that the BBC has been indulging. The background to our protest that we're carrying out tomorrow on the 29th is essentially set with what essentially transpired, the kind of feral attacks that sort of transpired on the streets of Leicester since September 12th. Um, and this was essentially the first time when there were these feral attacks against the Hindu diaspora and the Hindu community in Leicester, propagated and run in a very malicious way by a certain community in the UK. Um, but the reporting that was essentially done was completely misrepresented by institutions like the Guardian, the BBC, where they've used people like Margaret Freeman and call them social community leaders when it's well aware that the British agencies have called them as terrorist sympathizers because of their leanings for being pro ISIS. Margaret Freeman is a person who's who's been pro the 7/7 bombings, for instance, and the BBC tends to ends up using them as a reference point for painting or sort of understanding what has essentially transpired in Leicester. So it's against the backdrops against that kind of misreporting and the disinformation that BBC have been peddling for a very long time, that we, the Indian diaspora and the Hindu diaspora in Britain, have felt extremely irked and hurt by, and that sets our cause for tomorrow's protest.
Thank you very much for sharing that. So, can you now share specifically how this has affected the Hindu community, in the UK, the misrepresentation of the actual events that took place?
Certainly. I mean, the Hindu or the Indian diaspora in Britain, they're an extremely dogged community, extremely hardworking. They fought against all of the adversities, and they've contributed to the British society, all in all. I mean, you look at it from a prism of taxation, the kind of taxation that such a small diaspora essentially represents. It's huge. Almost 75% of the Indian diaspora and the Hindu diaspora in Britain own their own houses. So that demonstrates that we are not here for freebies. We want to contribute to society, and we want to better the society as a result of that. Prison population, our share of prison population in within the British jails is less than 1%. Whereas, if you look at the Muslim representation in the British jails, it's close to about 18%. So all in all, the contribution that we've essentially made to the British society and the British ethos and the ecosystem, it's well documented. But when there are institutions like the BBC and the Guardian which go on with their reporting standards, which is clearly rabid, which is clearly anti-Hindu biases, it hurts us, and it's not a good signal to the wider community as well. So it's essentially to let the wider community know as well of these nefarious designs and the nefarious kind of overt and sometimes covert reporting standards that institutions like the BBC have essentially followed.
Thank you for sharing that answer. So, I mean, so you mentioned how it's important for the wider community to understand this. Can you give an example to the wider community of something in particular that the BBC misrepresented? So, you did say they used Masjid Freeman as a reference, correct? And so, can you go into a little more detail about that? How the facts are misrepresented?
Yeah, I mean, so they've not only just used Margaret Freeman this time. There are other people like Muhammad Hijab, and they've
Mhm.
used him, his rabble rousing as something called a peaceful demonstration against the, the so-called Hindu extremists. I know for a fact that there is nothing called Hindu extremism, and if there is, then the BBC must come out and prove us wrong. I have never heard of any Hindus, shouting Jai Shri Ram and going and blowing themselves up. On the
Mhm.
contrary, there have been instances to point the other side. Uh, I don't want to dwell into that discourse because that's not the main foray of our discourse today. But essentially, BBC's reporting standards, when the 26/11 attacks happened in Bombay, instead of calling the terrorists, so instead of calling the spade a spade,
Mhm.
the BBC reported them as gunmen, right? As if they were just gunmen who were not happy with the Indian establishment. They were not happy with the Indian government, and they decided to take up arms and kill 164 people. So it's that kind of duplicity and hypocritical reporting standards that has sort of irked the community at large. There was a report a while ago which essentially spelled out by the BBC that the Indian government has been funding the MQM party of Pakistan, which is the Muttahida Qawmi Movement Party, whereby the leader Altaf Hussain is essentially sitting in London. And BBC's report essentially called out that the Indian government had been funding the MQM, which is a party in Pakistan, without any credible sources. And when they were asked to present those credible sources, the answer was essentially that they are anonymous sources. So if they do not even have the gall to to name their resources, or to name their sources, and then they go on to use them to produce rabid reporting which paints India in a certain way which India has never indulged in. There have been thousands of dossiers which India has present on the contrary, but Pakistan has never been able to produce that sort of a contrarian view, or a dossier within the United Nations which essentially says that India has essentially been financing any political party in Pakistan. So it's that kind of reporting standards which we are clearly against, and we want to sort of ensure that the public learns about this.
So it is good that we're responding now, and you're doing what you're doing to call out these poor reporting standards. But can I ask, how is it that they've been able to get away with it for so long? Because when you explain it, it seems kind of like common sense. But how is it that they're able to get away with the misinformation the way that they are?
I think accountability is a massive part of this, and because our collective, when I talk about the Indian collective conscience is very unorganized, and it's I would say it's probably negligible. We're not very organized when it comes to things like that. We do not react. We believe that freedom of speech is paramount, and that is why BBC has been able to get away with it. We still believe that the freedom of speech and freedom to report and freedom to criticize is paramount, but as long as it's done adhering the proper reporting standards, we are all for criticism. If there are ills within our society, within our culture, within our civilization, it must be called out, and it will help us introspect as well. But this kind of rabid reporting, which clearly has an agenda, anti-Hindu biases, anti-India narrative. this has to stop, from the kinds of BBC, especially because you have the Hindu taxpayers funding the BBC indirectly, and they're using our money to write against us. So it's an awakening call for the rest of the community to come out and say enough is enough. A couple of years ago, Republic TV was essentially banned by the Ofcom in Britain for apparently being anti-Pakistani, and they were essentially thrown out from the UK. I believe the same should be done with BBC World Services in India for presenting a very anti-India and anti-Hindu view.
I definitely understand where you're coming from with that. So you also said something about the collective Indian consciousness, and that actually brings me to my next question, which is how have other Hindus in general responded when you bring this to them? Whether it's organizations, individuals, maybe temples, have when you brought them when you told them about this protest, and then just the larger picture in general.
Abhishek, it's been an absolute uphill task. I mean, we've been involved for over a month trying to organize and trying to galvanize people and trying to awaken this spirit of this disinformation that we need to fight against. Some people have been forthcoming, they've been extremely encouraging. Some people have volunteered to stay behind the scenes because of, they do not want to be spotted in the protest because of the kind of work that they're involved in the UK. They've got visa restrictions, they've got visa compulsions, which they find it very hard to sort of meander around. And there have been some who've been very discouraging of protests
Mhm.
like this. I mean, people who essentially call themselves as community leaders, for example, they have their own agenda. So if they are not in the forefront, and if they do not get the limelight, and if they're not being able to hog the limelight, build a narrative, they've essentially been very discouraging of movements like this. I mean, we have no beef against them. All we want to do is awaken that collective conscience within the Hindu diaspora, and essentially give them that sort of that weapon to say, and call out the political correctness, and catch the bull by its horn. And that's precisely what we're trying to do. So the community, there has been support. A lot of organizations like FISI, there's Insight UK, there's Reach. They've been extremely supportive, but there have
Mhm.
been some decaying organizations which are still trying to find their relevance in this day and age, which have been very discouraging.
Hmm, okay. Can I also ask, like, is there? It does seem like I don't want to maybe compare with other communities too much, although I am kind of going to do that. But it does seem like other communities seem to be much better responding to these things, and whatever community it is, it, I don't think the BBC could get away with spreading misinformation on other communities that easily. Is there maybe something they're doing that we can learn from?
I mean, one of the communities that we need to learn from is the Israeli community. They're absolutely phenomenal in how they ensure that anything to do with anti-Semitism is taken up to the highest standards, and where we have failed miserably. And that's all because we're so divided between ourselves. We just do not have a collective voice to opine on issues affecting and impacting our society. Diversity is a good thing, but we also need that bit of unity in that diversity, which we've so far we've been failed to sort of galvanize and sort of rejuvenate within our society. But the Jewish community and the Israeli community, they've done it beautifully. And how they've plugged all the gaping holes whenever people have questioned or raised criticism about
Mhm.
anything remotely connected to anti-Semitism. They've taken it to the highest standards. The Muslims in the UK, they've done it really well. I mean, there's a whole movement of Islamophobia which is so successful, and one of the paramount reasons why it's successful is because there's such a good organized community, and they've been able to fight Islamophobia at standards, whether it be employment, whether it be politics, whether it be social community levels. They've been absolutely marvelous, and we definitely need to learn a few tricks from them.
Definitely, I like where you're coming from with that. So can I ask? Can you give us a little more information about this protest itself?
Sure. The protest is essentially it's a silent protest. It's more it is against the BBC, and we will be present in considerable numbers tomorrow outside the BBC headquarters in central London, holding our placards and calling out the BBC for all the ills that they've caused to us. But at the same time, it's also for awakening that collective Hindu conscience that I've been harping about, and it's to galvanize that force and show the mirror to our community, not only here in Britain, but also in India, where people have revered the BBC for the reporting standards. People have always used BBC as a reference point for positive and great journalism. So essentially to prove to them as well that the BBC is not all good. Their reporting standards also must be questioned whenever they faltered. The protest is largely it's a peaceful protest. It's going to be extremely well manned. We've got some community volunteers. We're going to make sure that there is no slogan, jeering or using foul languages or engaging with people who are opposing the protest. And we'll make sure it's done in a very dignified way and in the spirit of true Hinduism.
I love that. That's a wonderful thing. Now, for the there was a recent protest that happened against the Guardian as well. Do you want to speak a little bit about that? What
It's
exactly have they done?
again
Yes.
similar. The premise is all to do with the kind of feral attacks that essentially broke out on the streets of Leicester,
Mhm.
and how journalists like Aina J. Khan have used people like Margaret Freeman and Mohammed Ijab to spread disinformation and complete bundle of lies, which has just been proven wrong by the Leicester police. Um,
Mhm.
and it's that kind of disinformation which hurts the Hindu diaspora and paints the Hindu and the Indian diaspora in a certain way within the eyes of the British people, which is clearly wrong. And that became the premise for us to stand against the Guardian. And look what the Guardian does today. They've written a extremely horrible article about Rishi Sunak, who's the first
Mhm.
Hindu Prime Minister of Britain, and the article is essentially written by a Hindu reporter who works for the Guardian. I mean, that's the kind of travesty of justice that we're looking at. So it's pretty unfortunate, but it was imperative that we do this at a regular level so that these institutions can hear us and they are held accountable at every standard.
So now I definitely understand the reason for the protest, but I think for a lot of people out there, like, what would you say to a Hindu that, like, if you had to convince them of the importance of this protest? Like, a lot of people, maybe they don't want to be. They might feel that a protest is a very social justice sort of approach, and they may be against that kind of action. So, what would you say to them? Like, why is it important to come to this protest?
It's important to come to this protest because it just doesn't define us for what we're standing up today against, but it also defines us against all the ills and the kind of colonial reporting standards that the BBC have followed for umpteen number of years, which they need to be held accountable against. Also, from a future perspective, from our children's perspective,
Mhm.
it's important that we raise these questions and we raise these kind of accountability for people for institutions like the BBC, so that our children do not have to face the same kind of hate that we have that we're facing at this point. I mean, anything connected to Hinduism or anything connected remotely to Jai Shri Ram is viewed with such negative prism, which it shouldn't be. I mean, at the end
Mhm.
of the day, we're a civilization. We're a very old civilization that has taught humanity time and time again, and we have never we've only preached about tolerance rather than intolerance, and that's what we're being painted by institutions like the BBC. And it's important that our children learn about it.
Do you think that, because you mentioned just now, we've always preached about tolerance. Do you think that that has sort of been weaponized against us to where like we're held to a higher standard maybe than other groups?
Absolutely. I mean, the fact that that within our society we do not have a concept of blasphemy law
Hmm.
that gives space to institutions like the BBC to keep constantly criticizing our belief system, our faith, our gods and goddesses, our festivals. I mean, there was one article printed by the BBC which called Holi a filthy festival. I mean, imagine calling Eid, or
Hmm.
using the same kind of terminology for the kind of qurbanis that we have to witness on the streets of India and other parts of the world. There would be absolute civil war. But sometimes our tolerance is taken for granted, and which is why it's imperative that we must unite and we must stand up against the rabid reporting standards that the BBC have essentially followed for so many years.
So now, while you're at this protest, what do you expect to be the outcome following the protest? What impact do you think it will have?
Well, one of the foremost that we are hoping to get out of this is from a community perspective that more and more information is spread about how BBC has used our own tax monies to write against us. And we need to keep that sort of accountability check against institutions like the BBC. More and more people should be aware about this kind of rabid and anti-India and anti-Hindu reporting standards that the BBC followed. um, will the BBC change? Will we expect anything out of this protest tomorrow from the senior directors from the BBC? I hope we do, but we're not holding it to our hearts at this point. We will keep doing this again and again until the BBC realizes their wrongs and they've apologized profoundly to the Hindu and the Indian diaspora in Britain and worldwide.
That's wonderful. So, I mean, if people want to take place in this protest, what can they do to find you?
Just show up at 11 o'clock in the morning of the 29th of October, just outside
Mhm.
the BBC headquarters in central London, bang opposite the Langham Hotel in Oxford Circus, and you will find us there and just join us and let's do this together.
Now, do you have any? Are you going to be streaming it live online, the protest itself, or?
We have there will be a couple of Twitter handles which are trying to you know do some kind of live stream. We've also thought about a YouTube channel that's been set up. There is going to be some amount of media coverage as well. I'm led to believe, and I'm hoping through those mainstream media channels we're able to get our voices out to the people of India and Britain in conjunction.
Because I also think there may be a good opportunity if people can join the protest virtually. People outside of the UK, because I mean, we do want this message to reach the larger diaspora as well. So, I mean, if there's a way we could, join the protest like that, I think it would be awesome. So,
I mean, just follow the BBC Cello handle.
yeah.
It's a Twitter handle which has been recently set up, so please follow that and support a move. I mean, we do not want to stop here because we want to ensure that anybody who reports against India in a rabid way, and is trying to covertly or overtly trying to paint India in a negative way, we want the message to be loud and clear to them that we will come against you and we will use everything in our armory to stand up against the kind of hedonism that you're peddling. We're not going to stop and we're not going to shy away from the left liberal so-called intelligentsia, embedded within the UK universities. There are professors who've written such horrid research papers on India, on Hindus, on the concept of Hinduism. So we're not just going to stop at the BBC.
Mhm.
We will take the fight to them and we will stand up for what is right.
Now, that's very interesting because can you kind of explain how would you explain the difference between the way the more left-leaning liberal academia, or, is Hindu phobic versus a more right-wing Hindu phobia? Is there a way you can compare those two mindsets?
I don't think we can really. It's not binary at the end of the day,
Mhm.
um, and the left cabal has essentially played it beautifully. So they've used the sort of Islamofascists, and they've combined forces with the Islamofascists to peddle their narrative against Hinduism, which is beautifully done. And it's not only done in the UK; it's done beautifully in India as well. You know, occasions, you will see that, within the university structures, you've got two forms of sciences. You've got the conventional sciences, which are like your mechanical engineering, your
Mhm.
your chemical engineering, etc. And then you've got your social sciences, and it's the social sciences which has been the bane of the problem, where they've used the myopic understanding of Hindu and the Indic civilization, um, to ride, you know and to portray it in a very negative connotation.
Hmm. So now here's another thing that actually has come up before when I was talking about Hindu phobia in general. Is that a lot of times people disguise their Hindu hatred as more criticism of India or criticism of Modi. Can you kind of give an example of how maybe the BBC or how people do that? Like how they kind of disguise their Hindu hatred as just like, genuine political criticism?
Um, so they use words like Hindu extremists.
Hmm.
They use Jai Shri Ram as a warmongering slogan jeering. It's all started in 2014. Uh, you know, Before that there was this anti-India biases, which was demonstrated by institutions like the BBC. But post 2014, it's just gone into a different dimension altogether, and it's predominantly because they have a beef against the BJP government because they don't come from this very Anglo-influenced kind of political domain. So whereas somebody from a Congress would essentially suit the narrative because they're all for the colonial form of education, and because Narendra Modi sort of represents that sort of anti-colonialism, BBC is essentially taking that to a different dimension to paint Narendra Modi and the BJP as some sort of fascist leadership. There could be wrongs that the BJP has done. Nobody's saying that. You should write about that. But to paint an entire community and a complete collective conscience as Hindu extremism, without understanding the true definition of Hinduism, or without understanding what the Indic civilization essentially stands for, is what we're you know vehemently protesting against.
I understand that. So now, can you give people maybe an example of how do you differentiate between something that is a legitimate criticism versus because they use all the coded language, right? So, can you give an example of how do we tell the difference?
I mean, the most obvious difference is, if sati, for example, or
Mm,
child marriages within our society, it used to happen, and it was a wrong thing, and there were people within our community which stood up to point out what was wrong with our society, and they've
mm.
essentially brought those change. They've been the catalyst of that change within our society, and look at where we are today. We were an evolved society. The whole point of Sanatan is it's eternal. It will keep evolving. It will keep changing with times, and that's the ethos and the value system that we want to proceed with.
Okay, so what I'm getting from what you're saying is that oftentimes the things that they use to criticize Hinduism, we've actually been able to reform within ourselves. It's not like we necessarily needed an outside influence for us to change. Like we're able to see the faults within our own society. For
True.
and I think that's amazing that you mentioned that. So now, do you have any closing remarks about maybe a little bit more about the protest tomorrow and just a message for all the Sanatanis in the world?
Sure. I mean, all in all, wherever you find that you're seeing institutions which are using uh, you know rabid reporting standards against your faith, your civilizational values, it's imperative that we must stand up to those kind of bullies. just because they're able to articulate themselves better than us, just because they have degrees which may be from prestigious and esteemed universities, doesn't give them the right to paint our civilization value in a certain way, because they do not have an iota of understanding what the Indic civilization is all about. So we must take this war to them, and we must make them accountable for every report and every editorial that they print, which is against our civilizational values. On that note, Abhishek ji, I would really thank you and Chitty Media for taking this initiative to hear us out. You know, we need more people like yourselves and institutions like yourself to represent our voices, in this day and age.
Thank you very much for joining the show, Adichie. I really think it's great that you took the time to even organize this protest. So I guess my last word to everybody is, what's the name of the hashtag again? Cholo BBC?
BBC Chalo.
BBC Cello. Sorry about it. So follow the hashtag BBC Cello and support this protest. Thank you very much, guys. Namaste.
Please remember to subscribe to us and switch on the notifications for this channel. For our other social media links, more content, and to support our work, please visit citti.net. Dhanyavad. Namaskar.